Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Morano, we just heard, we hear it all the time, to shut down any kind of debate on this subject. Well, 97% of the scientists all agree. What's wrong with you? Would you care to comment on that? Where does that come from?
The 97% is a talking point that's been around. Even in Al Gore's first book, he didn't say 97%, but he said all scientists agree. It's a form of intimidation. It tells people you don't have to understand the science, you don't have to understand the issue. Hey, all you need to know is that the United Nations parrots it, the media parrots it, and the few studies out there parrot that 97% of scientists and or studies agree. Well, I have a whole chapter in my book on this. And before Congress, you had a United Nations IPCC lead author testify that the 97%, as evidenced by John Cook, was quite simply, quote, pulled from thin air, unquote. None of the figures in the study justify the 97% claim.
This was the 2013 study by John Cook.
By John Cook, yes.
11,944 abstracts. And then somebody else took a look at them.
Yes, there were other studies that they started out with over 10,000 scientists. They whittled it down to 77 scientists. They tortured the data until they came up with 75 or so anonymous scientists who agree with the 97%. We don't know the scientist's name. We don't know their affiliation. We don't know their bios. But that number in those studies are pounded on us daily, over and over, anyone in this debate, to silence dissent.
Dr. Moore?
What about anybody who uses the word consensus in relation to science is not a scientist. Consensus is not a scientific word. It is a political word that has to do with majorities in democracies and with policies that are voted on. Consensus in science is meaningless, and that is a fact, because people like Galileo, Mendel, Darwin, Einstein, and many others fought against false consensus or false majority for all their lives in many cases till they died, even though they had the truth. Consensus is not allowed to be used in scientific discussions. It has no meaning whatsoever other than that there is a herd mentality of some kind.
Which is why science has to be independently verifiable. The data has to be out there and has to be verifiable by anyone who is looking at it. And in the case of the Cook report, independent verification found only 0.3% of those 11,944 abstracts and 1.6% of the smaller sample that excluded those papers, expressing no opinion, endorsed man-made global warming as they defined it. So
yes,
97% consensus is a 0.3% consensus.
There is a difference between a consensus or a majority of people agreeing on a certain thing.
Which gets me back to the principal question that brings us all here today. Where's the scientific report? We don't have one. We have a summary written by politicians. But we don't have the actual report, so we can't begin to independently verify it. Is that science?
You are correct. The key distinction that has to be made here is the difference between a fact and a policy. It is facts that inform policy. Policy is an opinion. It is a decision that is made based, hopefully, on good facts. The policies that are being recommended by the alarmists on the climate side are not based on good facts. And therefore, no matter what percentage of scientists agree with them, it's not going to give you good policy.
Now, Dr. Moore, you mentioned that over the broad 4.5 billion years of the planet, there have been periods where carbon dioxide concentrations have been much, much higher than they are today. They're about 400 parts per million today. During the Cambrian period, they were at roughly 8,000 parts per million. So many, many times higher. And you testified that scientists conclude that the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have been declining over those millennia to the point where we reached in the modern era the lowest concentration we recorded. You said it got down to as low as 180 parts per million. What happens at 150 parts per million?
At 150 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, plants die. They don't just need carbon dioxide to survive. They need a certain level of it, just like we need a certain level of oxygen to survive.
And what do growers use as an enriched atmosphere for plant growth in their greenhouses?
Virtually all commercial greenhouse growers enrich the atmosphere in their greenhouse with between 800 and 1,200, in other words, 2 to 3 times the level in the global atmosphere today in order to get 20 to 60% increase in growth. And indeed, this is happening globally as we have increased CO2 from 280 to 410 parts per million. A greening of the Earth is occurring. NASA has it on their website. The Australian scientists and the European scientists all confirm that there has been a massive increase in global biomass, that is plant biomass, as a result of the CO2 fertilization of the Earth, otherwise known as the greening of the Earth. We, in fact, by releasing the CO2 back into the environment from where it was depleted by life in the first place, are the salvation of life on Earth, because it has gone down as low as 180.
Doctor, I have allowed extra time a couple of times now, but I have to bring it back to the committee, and the chair now recognizes Mr.